Imagine being a cleaner, working in silence while the world ignores you. But one night, a millionaire walks in, catches you secretly studying in the dark. What happens next will change everything. This isn't just a story. It's proof that no dream is too small, and no beginning is too humble. The underground parking lot was unusually silent that night. The hum of the fluorescent lights above echoed through the cold concrete walls, their flickering glow painting long shadows that stretched across the floor. In one of those shadows sat a young woman dressed in a blue cleaner's uniform. Beside her was a red bucket, still wet from mopping, and a stainless steel flask. But her focus was not on the tools of her trade. Instead, her eyes remained locked on the notebook, resting in her lap, her pen gliding furiously across the pages. Her name was Amara. To the world, she was just another cleaner, a figure people barely noticed as she pushed her mop through the hallways of tall office buildings or scrubbed staircases late at night. But behind her quiet exterior lived a mind full of questions, curiosity, and an unshakable hunger to learn. While others saw a cleaner, she saw herself as a student of life, of knowledge, of possibilities. Every spare moment, she buried herself in books borrowed from public libraries, online articles she had printed out, or her own handwritten notes. Tonight was no different. But what Amara didn't know was that someone was watching. A man's footsteps echoed through the empty parking lot. His shoes clicked with authority, the sound growing closer. He wore a beige trench coat, the kind only someone with wealth and taste would casually throw over a tailored navy blue suit. His tie was perfectly knotted, his stride confident, his expression unreadable. This was Alexander Harrington, a millionaire entrepreneur known in the city for his real estate empire, his sharp instincts, and his cold demeanor. He had finished a late-night meeting and was heading toward his car when he noticed the figure sitting against the wall. At first, he thought it was just a cleaner resting. But as he drew nearer, he saw her writing, her face illuminated by the dim fluorescent light. The concentration in her eyes startled him. It was not the kind of look he expected from someone in her position. He slowed his pace. Amara, lost in her notebook, didn't notice him. She was scribbling notes about business models she had been studying from an old textbook she found at a thrift store. Ideas filled her head, concepts about how companies scaled, the strategies they used to expand, the lessons they carried. She wasn't simply copying. She was analyzing, questioning, trying to connect dots that most business school students struggled with. Alexander stopped a few feet away and cleared his throat. The sound jolted Amara back to reality. She looked up, startled, and quickly closed her notebook as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. "You're writing?" Alexander asked, his voice smooth yet slightly curious. Amara scrambled to her feet, clutching the notebook to her chest. "Sorry, sir. I was just taking a short break." Her instinct told her not to reveal too much. People rarely reacted kindly when they discovered that someone in her position dared to dream beyond the role society assigned to her. But Alexander was not like most people. He tilted his head, studying her. "What were you writing?" Amara hesitated. She could lie. She could say it was a diary, a shopping list, or something trivial. But something in his gaze made her speak the truth. "Notes," she said quietly. "Business notes. I study whenever I get a chance." Alexander raised his eyebrows. "Business notes?" "Yes." She swallowed nervously. "I want to understand how companies grow, how leaders think, how wealth is created." For a moment, Alexander said nothing. He simply looked at her, his sharp mind processing what he had just heard. Here was a cleaner in a parking lot at midnight, speaking of wealth creation and business growth as though she belonged in one of his boardrooms. Finally, he asked, "And why does that interest you?" Amara's grip on her notebook tightened. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with conviction. "Because I don't want to be here forever. I clean floors now, But I want to build something of my own. I want to prove that where you start doesn't have to define where you finish." The words hung in the cold air. Alexander felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity mixed with respect. He could easily dismiss her, walk past, and never think of her again. But something about her determination, the fire in her voice, stirred something inside him. "Show me," he said. Amara blinked. "Show you? What?" "Your notes." His tone was calm, yet commanding. Amara froze. Those notes were deeply personal. Her dreams, her observations, her clumsy yet passionate attempts to understand the world of business. What if he mocked her? What if he told her she was foolish for even trying? But something in his eyes, cold, yet strangely attentive, made her slowly hand over the notebook. Alexander took it, flipping through the pages. At first, his face remained impassive, but as he read, his expression shifted. Her notes were raw, unpolished, and at times naive, but they also revealed an astonishing clarity of thought. She had dissected case studies, questioned leadership decisions, and even scribbled ideas for hypothetical startups. It wasn't the work of someone copying blindly, it was the work of a mind that refused to settle. "You wrote all this?" he finally asked. "Yes," Amara said softly, bracing herself for ridicule. But instead, Alexander closed the notebook gently and handed it back. His eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in thought. "You're different," he murmured. Amara frowned. "Different? Most people in your position wouldn't spend their breaks studying business theories. They'd scroll their phones or rest. But you..." He paused, his gaze piercing. "You're preparing for something bigger." A silence settled between them. Amara felt exposed, as though he had looked directly into her soul. She forced a small smile, though her hands trembled. "I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I have to try." Alexander adjusted his coat, his mind racing. In his world of polished boardrooms and ambitious investors, he rarely met anyone who possessed such raw hunger. Ambition was common among the wealthy, but to see it burning so brightly in someone with nothing, that was rare. Without another word, he turned and began to walk away. Amara stood frozen, watching him disappear into the shadows. Her heart pounded. She had expected scolding, mockery, maybe even punishment for slacking during work. Instead, she was left with a strange sense of unease, like something had just shifted, though she couldn't yet understand what. But what Amara didn't know was that this brief encounter had planted a seed in Alexander's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her words, her determination, and the fire in her eyes. And that seed was about to grow into something that would change both of their lives forever. That night, Amara returned home to her small, dimly lit apartment. The city outside was alive with neon signs and honking cars, but her room was quiet. Too quiet. She set her notebook on the tiny wooden table by the bed and sat for a long moment, replaying the encounter in her mind. She should have been relieved that the man didn't mock her or report her for wasting time, but his gaze, his words, "You're preparing for something bigger," lingered in her head like an echo. She couldn't escape. Who was he really? The way he carried himself, the expensive coat, the aura of authority. He wasn't an ordinary office worker, but she didn't dare to imagine he was the Alexander Harrington she had read about in business magazines. No, that would be too surreal. Why would someone like him even stop to speak to her? Still, sleep was hard to find that night. Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if fate had just brushed against her life in the most unexpected way. The next evening, Amara returned to her cleaning shift as usual. She slipped into her blue uniform, tied her hair back, and pushed her mop bucket through the corridors of the underground garage. Everything felt the same, until it didn't. As she turned a corner, she saw him again. Alexander Harrington. He leaned casually against his sleek black car, his coat draped over one arm. His eyes met hers the instant she appeared. For a moment, Amara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. He straightened and walked toward her. "I thought I might see you here." "Again," he said, his tone calm yet deliberate. Amara forced herself to keep her composure. "I work here every night." "Yes," he replied, studying her face. "But I wondered if you'd still be writing." Amara lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I remember everything," Alexander said, firmly. Then, after a pause, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about not wanting to be here forever, about proving where you start doesn't define where you finish." Amara bit her lip. She hadn't expected him to take her words seriously. "And?" she asked cautiously. "And," Alexander said, his eyes sharp, "I want to know if you really mean it." Amara frowned. "Of course I mean it. Why else would I spend my breaks studying? It's easy to dream," he said flatly. "It's harder to act. Most people with ambition talk, but they never risk, never fight, never sacrifice." His gaze locked onto hers, piercing. "Are you different?" The question struck her deeply. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Was she different? Could she prove she was more than just a cleaner with lofty dreams? "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. Alexander's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not of kindness, but of intrigue. "Good. Then let's see." The following night, when Amara arrived at work, she found something unusual waiting for her. On the cleaning cart, beside the mop and rags, was a small white envelope with her name written neatly across it. She looked around, startled, but no one else was there. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address written in bold letters. Below it, a short message. "Come tomorrow at 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. A.H." Her breath caught. A.H. Alexander Harrington. For a long moment, Amara just stood there, clutching the note. She didn't know whether to feel excited, terrified, or suspicious. Why would a millionaire summon her? What could he possibly want with a cleaner like her? But beneath the swirl of doubt, one feeling outweighed all the others. Opportunity. She couldn't ignore it. The next evening, Amara found herself standing in front of a tall glass building downtown. Its sleek exterior reflected the city lights like a mirror. She double-checked the address. It matched the one on the note. Inside, she was greeted by a receptionist who, to her surprise, already seemed to know her name. Without question, the woman directed her to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Amara stepped into a world she had only seen in magazines. A vast office spread before her, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Modern furniture gleamed under soft lighting, and the air smelled faintly of leather and polish. At the far end, standing with his hands in his pockets, was Alexander. "You came," he said, turning to face her. "I wasn't sure if I should," Amara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yet you're here," he replied. "That says something already." He gestured for her to sit at a long conference table. She obeyed, her palms sweating as she tried to absorb the reality of where she was. Alexander took a seat across from her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me," he said. "What do you know about me?" Amara hesitated. She didn't want to sound ignorant, but she also didn't want to pretend. "You're Alexander Harrington," she said carefully. "Real estate, investments. I've read a little about your work. You're one of the wealthiest men in the city." He raised an eyebrow. "And what does that mean to you?" Amara looked down at her hands. "It means you've achieved what I can only dream of. Success, freedom, influence. The kind of life people like me aren't supposed to reach. Alexander leaned forward slightly. And yet, you want it. Yes. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. More than anything. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Alexander spoke, his tone sharper now. Then here's your first test. Amara's breath caught. He slid a folder across the table. She opened it to find several pages filled with information about a struggling cafe chain, financial reports, customer reviews, and a short history of the business. This company is failing, Alexander said. Losses for 3 consecutive years. Poor customer retention. Weak leadership. If nothing changes, it will collapse within the next 6 months. Amara looked at the papers, confused. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to tell me how you would save it. Her eyes widened. Me? Yes, Alexander said firmly. You say you study business. You say you want to build something of your own. Then show me how you think. Show me your mind. Amara's heart pounded. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't ready, that she was just a cleaner with no real-world experience. But something inside her whispered that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to prove herself. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I'll try. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes never leaving her. Good. You have 1 week. That week was the hardest of Amara's life. By day, she worked her cleaning shifts, scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. By night, she buried herself in research, studying cafe chains, business turnarounds, customer psychology, and financial strategies. Her tiny apartment became a battlefield of open books, printed reports, and scribbled notes. She barely slept. She barely ate. Every spare second was consumed by the challenge. There were moments she wanted to give up, when the numbers overwhelmed her, when her lack of formal education screamed in her face, when exhaustion made her hands tremble as she held her pen. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Alexander's piercing gaze, his challenge, his question, "Are you different?" And she pushed forward. At the end of the week, Amara returned to the glass tower, clutching her notebook filled with ideas. Alexander was waiting, seated at the head of the conference table. "Let's hear it," he said simply. Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to begin. She spoke of rebranding the cafe chain to highlight authenticity and community. She proposed partnerships with local suppliers to cut costs and attract ethically conscious customers. She suggested introducing loyalty programs and modernizing the interior design to create a welcoming environment. She even outlined a phased financial recovery plan complete with projections. The more she spoke, the stronger her voice became. She no longer felt like a cleaner in a borrowed world. She felt like a strategist, a thinker, someone who belonged at that table. When she finally finished, silence fell. Alexander didn't move. His face was unreadable, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Amara's heart raced. Had she said something foolish? Had she failed? At last, Alexander leaned back, his gaze steady. "Interesting," he murmured. "Interesting good. Or interesting bad?" Amara asked nervously. A small smile tugged at his lips. "Interesting enough to make me want to test you again." Her eyes widened. "Again?" "Yes," he said. "You've proven you can think. Now I want to see if you can act." Amara walked out of the office that night feeling like her life had taken a turn she couldn't yet comprehend. She had no idea what the next test would be, but one thing was certain. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was stepping into a world where every choice, every word, and every action could change her destiny forever. And Alexander Harrington, the man who had once been a stranger in a parking lot, was about to become the most important figure in that journey. The days that followed were unlike anything Amara had ever experienced. She had expected Alexander to test her again with papers, theories, or another hypothetical challenge. Instead, his next move was far more ruthless and far more real. He called her one evening, his voice sharp and commanding. "I want you to meet me tomorrow morning at this address," he said, sending her a location. "Be ready. This time it won't be about ideas. It will be about execution." Amara's stomach tightened. She wanted to ask questions, to prepare, to understand what she was walking into. But before she could say a word, he ended the call. Tui, following morning, she stood in front of a modest but struggling cafe, the very chain she had spent sleepless nights analyzing. Its once bright sign was faded, the windows smudged, and only a handful of customers sat inside, sipping their drinks in silence. Alexander was already there, standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Why are we here?" Amara asked nervously. "Because talk is cheap," he replied coldly. "You gave me ideas, and they were good. But ideas without action are worthless. So now, I want you to prove you can do what you say. For the next 2 weeks, this cafe is yours to run. No excuses, no shortcuts. I'll give you access to a small budget for improvements. If you can increase its sales and customer traffic in that time, you pass. If not," he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, "then you're just another dreamer." Amara's breath caught. 2 weeks? Run a failing cafe? With no formal training, no staff who respected her, no safety net? It felt impossible. But then she remembered the notebook she had clutched every night. The words she had written in the quiet corners of the garage. The fire that had driven her this far. "I'll do it," she whispered, though her hands shook. Alexander studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "We'll see." The next 2 weeks were a blur of chaos. On her first day, Amara faced resistance from the cafe's staff. They looked at her, a cleaner, a nobody, and scoffed at the idea that she was in charge. Some ignored her instructions outright. Others muttered under their breath, doubting her ability. But Amara refused to back down. She rolled up her sleeves and worked alongside them. She scrubbed counters, served customers, and even stood outside handing out flyers with a smile. Slowly, the staff began to respect her, not because of her title, but because of her relentless effort. She used the small budget Alexander gave her wisely. Instead of expensive renovations, she invested in small but impactful changes. Fresh paint on the walls, new menu boards with vibrant designs, cozy seating arrangements, and soft background music that gave the place warmth. She introduced promotions, buy one, get one free, offers during slow hours, loyalty cards for regulars, and a new menu item every week to spark curiosity. She partnered with a local bakery to add fresh pastries at low cost, drawing in new customers who couldn't resist the smell. And most importantly, she listened. Every evening, Amara would sit with customers, asking them what they liked, what they wished was different, and what would make them come back. Their feedback became her blueprint. Day by day, the cafe changed. The once empty tables began to fill. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of cups. Sales rose, slowly at first, then steadily. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when Amara collapsed on her bed, too exhausted to move. Days when suppliers failed, when staff argued, when numbers didn't add up. There were moments she nearly broke down, questioning whether she had taken on more than she could handle. But each time, she remembered Alexander's voice. "Are you different?" And she pushed on. At the end of 2 weeks, Alexander returned to the cafe. He walked in quietly, his sharp eyes scanning the space. The walls were brighter. The menu board glowed with new life. Customers filled the seats, chatting, laughing, sipping coffee. The staff moved with energy and purpose. Amara stood behind the counter, her uniform smudged with flour, her hair tied back, but her face glowing with determination. When she saw him, her heart skipped. "Well?" she asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Alexander didn't answer immediately. He ordered a coffee, sat at a table, and observed. He watched how customers interacted, how staff responded, how the atmosphere had shifted. Finally, after half an hour, he stood and approached her. "You've done it," he said simply. Amara's knees nearly buckled. Relief and pride surged through her, tears welling in her eyes. But then Alexander added, "Don't celebrate yet. This was just one cafe. Running a business is not about one victory. It's about sustaining success over time. The real world won't give you 2 weeks and a small budget. It will demand everything from you, your time, your energy, your sacrifices." Amara nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, his cold demeanor softened. "You remind me of myself," he said quietly. Amara blinked. "You?" "Yes," he replied. "I didn't start with wealth. My father was a mechanic. My mother worked as a seamstress. I built everything from scratch. And I remember the nights I stayed awake, studying, planning, dreaming, just like you." Amara's eyes widened. She had never imagined that beneath his polished exterior was a story not so different from hers. "So why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Alexander's gaze darkened, not unkindly, but with a weight of truth. "Because I know how rare you are. Most people in your position give up before they even start. But you kept going. You refused to let the world tell you who you are, and that kind of fire, it deserves a chance." Amara's throat tightened. For the first time, she saw him not just as a millionaire, but as someone who understood her struggle, her hunger, her dreams. Weeks later, something extraordinary happened. Alexander invited Amara to a large business conference, a gathering of entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders. She hesitated, terrified at the thought of standing in a room full of powerful people. But Alexander insisted. When they arrived, the hall was dazzling. Men and women in suits, expensive watches, and confident smiles. Amara felt completely out of place in her simple dress. But then Alexander did something she would never forget. He walked to the stage, took the microphone, and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the room, "I want to introduce someone to you, someone who represents what true ambition looks like." The audience turned, curious. "This is Amara," he continued. "Not long ago she was working as a cleaner in one of my buildings. But while others saw her as invisible, I saw something different, a mind, a fire, a determination that most people lose as soon as life gets hard. In just weeks, she took a failing cafe and turned it into a thriving business. Without formal education, without resources, only with grit and vision." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amara's face burned, her hands trembling as she tried to process what was happening. Alexander looked at her, then back at the audience. "And that," he said firmly, "is the kind of person I want to invest in. Not because of where she came from, but because of where she's going." The room erupted in applause. Amara stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. Tears streamed down her face, not of weakness, but of triumph. She had spent her life being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, and now, in front of the city's most powerful people, she was being recognized, not as a cleaner, but as a leader. In the months that followed, Amara's life transformed. With Alexander's mentorship and initial investment, she launched her own small cafe business, one built on the principles she had tested and proven. Slowly it grew. One cafe became two became 5. Customers loved the warmth, the authenticity, the community spirit she infused into every space. And through it all, she never forgot where she started, scribbling notes in the dim corners of a parking garage, dreaming of a life that seemed impossible. Whenever people asked about her journey, she smiled and said, I wasn't discovered, I prepared, and when opportunity came, I was ready. As for Alexander Harrington, he remained her toughest critic and strongest ally. Behind his stern demeanor, he carried pride, for he had not just found a cleaner in the dark. He had found a force of nature. And so, the story spread. People whispered about the millionaire who had caught a cleaner studying in the shadows, and instead of dismissing her, gave her the chance to rise. What happened next shocked everyone, because that cleaner, once invisible, became a name people spoke with admiration, a symbol of resilience. Proof that no matter where you start, if you dare to dream and refuse to quit, you can rewrite your destiny.